To understand why my pulse was currently trying to hammer its way out of my throat, you have to understand the heat. Not the fire itself. We were used to that. I mean the heat radiating from Crew Chief Miller, who was standing 3 feet away from me with a look that could strip the bark off a ponderosa pine. I was covered in ash, chest heaving, standing in front of 20 exhausted firefighters who were waiting for the axe to fall. I thought I was saving the line. Instead, I had just shattered her absolute control. And now, I was about to confess the one thing that could burn us both to the ground. To get to that moment of public ruin, you have to go back to the start of the roll. We had been stuck in the crew carrier, the Crummy, for 8 hours of white-knuckle driving up a logging road that was more pothole than gravel. The back of the buggy was a sensory nightmare. The air conditioning had died hours ago, leaving us marinating in a thick, stagnant soup of diesel fumes, saw gas, and the kind of aggressive body odor that only comes from a hotshot crew on day 14 of a roll. I was vibrating. It was a mix of stale gas station coffee and the pre-fire adrenaline that I never seemed to outgrow, even after 5 seasons. I was practically bouncing in the cramped bench seat, my energy scattering in every direction. Beside me, Miller sat in absolute stillness. She had her sunglasses on, despite the dim interior, arms crossed over her chest in a way that communicated she was not participating in the crew's banter. The proximity was torture. The seats in a Crummy are designed for gear, not people, forcing us into a friction that felt dangerous. Every time the rig hit a washout, our shoulders collided. I couldn't sit still. My left leg was tapping a frantic staccato rhythm against the metal floorboard, a nervous tick I couldn't suppress. I reached for my canteen, fumbled, and nearly elbowed her in the ribs. That's when she moved. Without a sigh or a shift in weight, Miller reached out, her hand warm and calloused, and clamped her fingers over my bouncing knee. The contact was electric, a sudden grounding wire for all my scattered energy. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The heavy, fire-resistant fabric of my Nomex pants did nothing to block the heat of her palm. She slid her sunglasses down her nose just an inch, revealing eyes that were sharp, dark, and fixed on me with a look of exhausted patience. "Bishop," she said, her voice low, cutting through the roar of the diesel engine like a frequency only I was tuned to receive. "You are vibrating the entire rig. If you don't calibrate, I'm going to have to strap you to the roof." It wasn't a threat. It was an instruction. And the way my body responded was traitorous. My heart didn't slow down. It spiked, hammering against my ribs. But the nervous fidgeting vanished instantly. I nodded, unable to form a coherent sentence. She held my gaze for a second longer, checking to see if the order had landed, then pushed her glasses back up and returned to her statue-like pose. But she didn't move her hand. For the next 50 miles, her hand stayed on my knee, a heavy, calming weight that kept me anchored to the seat. I watched the tension in her jaw, the way her thumb would occasionally brush against the seam of my pants, unconscious and seeking. It was a professional boundary crossed in the dark, a silent admission that she needed the contact just as much as I needed the restraint. The air between us thickened, charged with everything we weren't saying. When the buggy finally hissed its air brakes and lurched to a halt at the drop point, the loss of her touch felt like a physical cold snap. The heavy steel doors swung open, dumping us out into the thin, high-altitude air. It was an immediate sensory assault. Chainsaws clattered as the Sawyers unloaded the compartments, and the smell of pine resin mixed with the distant, acrid scent of smoke. While I stumbled out, trying to get my legs to work again, Miller was already on the ground. She didn't look like she'd just spent 8 hours in a metal box. She looked ready for war. She stood by the tool compartment, clipboard in hand, already barking orders to the squad bosses. "Get the line gear on the ridge," she commanded, her voice crisp. "I want tools in the dirt in 10 minutes. I grabbed my pack, the weight of it familiar and grounding, but my skin still burned where her hand had been. I watched her direct the chaos, pointing out sectors and organizing the gear dump with the precision of an air traffic controller. She was professional, cold, and necessary. But as I slung my line gear over my shoulder, I saw her glance my way. Just for a second. A quick, dark check to see if I was still calibrated. And in that split second, the professional mask slipped, just enough to show the heat underneath. The landing zone was less of a campsite and more of a demolition derby, involving heavy equipment and exhausted people. The dust didn't settle. It just rearranged itself into our lungs. We were spiking out, which in hotshot terms meant we were sleeping in the dirt, miles from the nearest shower or hot meal, with nothing but what we carried on our backs. The air was thick with the mechanical scream of chainsaws being tuned and the dull thud of red gear bags hitting the hard-packed earth. It was organized chaos, a symphony of industrial noise, and Miller was the conductor. I watched her from the edge of the drop point as I sharpened a Pulaski. She was directing the placement of the supply line, her sunglasses finally off, tucked into the collar of her yellow Nomex shirt. Her face was smudged with soot, highlighting the sharp angles of her cheekbones. She moved with a terrifying economy of motion. While the rest of us were dragging our feet, stumbling over roots in our heavy logging boots, Miller cut through the confusion like a prow. She didn't yell. A simple point was enough to send 20 grown men and women scrambling to obey. It was professional, efficient, and annoyingly attractive. "Bishop," she called out, not even looking in my direction. "Stop staring and grab the cubies. We need water at the ridge." I bristled, grabbing the 5-gallon water containers. I wasn't staring, I muttered, mostly to myself. I was assessing leadership strategies. The camp location was a joke. It was a steep, rocky spine of a ridge that dropped off into a burning canyon on one side and a cliff on the other. Finding flat ground was like finding a diamond in a coal mine. By the time we hauled the gear up the goat trail, the sun was dipping below the smoke layer, turning the sky a bruised, violent purple. The crew scattered, claiming tiny patches of level dirt between the boulders to roll out their sleeping bags. I found a spot near the communication relay, a small, dusty shelf protected by a cluster of rocks. It was perfect. It was also the only spot left. I dropped my pack, wiping sweat from my forehead, just as a shadow fell over me. Miller stood there, her own pack hanging off one shoulder. She looked at the ground, then at me, then back at the ground. The shelf was maybe 6 feet wide, enough for 2 people, if those 2 people liked each other. Or if they were desperate. "It's the only flat ground left," she said, her voice flat. "I saw it first," I countered, though the fight had no real heat in it. We were both too tired. "I'm the crew chief," she replied, dropping her pack next to mine with a heavy thud. "Rank has its privileges. We share." We didn't set up a tent. There wasn't room, and the night air was still holding the day's heat. We just cleared the rocks and rolled out our sleeping bags. The one-bed trope is romantic in hotels. In the dirt, it's tactical. We laid the bags out parallel, head to toe to maximize shoulder room, but even then, the space between us was non-existent. My sleeping bag zipper was touching hers. I sat down to unlace my boots, acutely aware of her movements inches away. She stripped off her heavy line gear, stacking it neatly. Helmet, gloves, radio chest harness, everything in its place. Order amidst the entropy. When she sat down to take off her boots, her shoulder brushed mine. It wasn't a collision. It was a graze, a friction of heavy fabric and warm muscle. I froze. She didn't. "You breathe loud," she commented, not looking at me. "I'm alive," I snapped back, struggling with a knot in my laces. "It's a side effect." Miller finished with her boots and turned to face me. The twilight was fading, but I could see the dark intensity in her eyes. She leaned forward, reaching between us. For a second, my heart hammered against my ribs, thinking, hoping, she was reaching for me. Instead, she dug her finger into the loose dirt between our sleeping bags. She dragged it down the length of the space, carving a shallow, jagged trench in the dust. "This," she said, her voice low and rough, "is the fire line. That side is chaos. This side is order. Keep your gear, your limbs, and your loud breathing on your side, Bishop." "Or what?" I challenged, my voice dropping to match hers. "Or I'll have you digging latrines for the rest of the roll," she promised. She lay back, pulling her sleeping bag up to her chin, effectively ending the conversation. I lay down on my side of the line, staring up at the smoke-hazed stars. The ground was hard, the air smelled of burning pine, and 3 inches away, the woman who terrified and fascinated me was trying to sleep. I could hear the steady rhythm of her breathing, a soft, human sound that betrayed the robot facade. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. I was too busy feeling the radiant heat of her body across the invisible line in the dirt, wondering what would happen if I reached across it. The camp settled into a heavy, exhausted silence, broken only by the hiss of the Coleman lanterns and the rhythmic shh, shh of files against steel. Tool maintenance wasn't optional. It was religion. If your tool was dull, you were dangerous. If your saw was dirty, you were a liability. I was sitting on a stump at the edge of the firelight, a steel 462 chainsaw clamped firmly between my knees, trying to file the cutter teeth. It should have been meditative. It usually was. But tonight, my hands were shaking. Not from fatigue, though God knows my shoulders were screaming from the hike, but from the hyper-awareness that Miller was sitting 3 feet away, stripping down her own saw with the casual, terrifying intimacy of a lover undressing. She wiped the clutch cover with a shop rag, her movement slow and deliberate. The lantern light caught the grease smudged on her forearm, highlighting the corded muscle as she turned to scrunch. I watched her hands. They were scarred, stained with carbon and bar oil, and capable of extreme violence against a burning tree. Yet they handled the small engine parts with delicate precision. I looked back at my chain. I was forcing it. I knew I was. I pushed the round file into the gullet of the tooth and shoved. It snagged. I cursed under my breath, a sharp exhale of frustration that puffed into the cold air. "You're stripping the chrome," a voice said from the dark. I didn't look up. "It's a burr. I'm working it out." "You're forcing the angle," Miller corrected. I heard the heavy thud of her boots hitting the dirt as she stood up. "You're grinding it. You need to stroke it." My grip tightened on the file handle until my knuckles turned white. "I know how to sharpen a saw, Miller. Clearly not tonight." She didn't walk around to face me. She moved behind me. The air shifted, displacing the cold night breeze with a sudden, radiating warmth. She stepped into my space, her chest hovering inches from my back. I could smell her, not just the sweat and smoke that covered all of us, but the underlying scent of her skin. Something like rain on hot asphalt and gun oil. "Drop your shoulders," she murmured, her voice vibrating right near my ear. I tried to obey, but my muscles were locked tight. "Relax," she commanded, lower this time. She reached around me. Her left hand landed on the chainsaw handle, stabilizing the bar between my knees. Her right hand covered mine on the file. Her fingers were rough, calloused sandpaper against my skin, but her grip was firm. She swallowed my hand in hers, taking control of the movement. "Don't push down," she whispered, the breath of her words ghosting against the sensitive skin of my neck. "Let the file do the work. You're fighting the metal. You have to feel where it wants to go." She guided my hand forward. The file slid across the tooth with a smooth, singing note. A perfect, biting stroke. "Shh. There," she said. "Feel that? That's the edge." My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, loud enough that she had to feel it through my back. She didn't pull away. She stayed there, wrapping me in her heat, guiding my hand through another stroke. And another. It was a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. Forward, lift, return. Forward, lift, return. The friction wasn't just on the metal anymore. It was the way her forearm brushed against my bicep. It was the way her thighs were braced on either side of the stump, effectively trapping me in a cage of her body. It was tool maintenance, technically, but it felt like she was sharpening me, honing my edges until I was just as dangerous as the saw. "You're too tense," she noted, her thumb digging into the meat of my hand, adjusting my grip. "You're trying to control the outcome instead of the process. If you grip it too tight, you lose the sensitivity. You have to hold it loose enough to feel the vibration." "I'm trying," I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. "Try harder," she said. She leaned in closer, pressing her chest against my back to reach a difficult angle on the chain. The contact was a shockwave. For a split second, there was no fire, no crew, no job. Just the crushing weight of her against me and the slide of steel on steel. "Smooth," she instructed, her voice dropping to a register that curled in my gut. "Don't rush the end of the stroke. Follow through." We did the entire side of the chain like that. 24 cutters, 24 strokes of shared breath and guided hands. By the time we finished, I was lightheaded, my skin burning under the layers of Nomex. She finally pulled back, the loss of her warmth leaving me shivering in the mountain air. She stepped around to face me, picking up the rag to wipe her hands. Her eyes were dark, unreadable in the lantern light, but her pupils were blown wide. "Better," she said, her voice clipped, professional again. But she didn't look at the saw. She looked at my mouth. "Keep it sharp, Bishop. Dull tools get people hurt." She turned and walked back into the darkness without another word, leaving me sitting there, clutching the file like a lifeline, the metal still warm from her touch. The sun didn't rise the next morning. It detonated. By 0900, the temperature on the south-facing slope was already pushing 90, and we were in the thick of it. This was the dig, the brutal, unglamorous reality of wildland firefighting. It wasn't about heroics or adrenaline. It was about moving dirt. It was violent gardening on a mountainside that wanted to kill you. The air was a suffocating blend of dust, pine pollen, and the copper tang of dried blood in my nose. My world narrowed down to the 3 feet of ground in front of me. Swing, thud, scrape, step. The rhythm was hypnotic, a grueling dance of muscle failure. I was swinging my Pulaski with a ferocity that bordered on manic, tearing through roots and rocks like they had personally offended me. I wasn't just digging line. I was performing. I could feel Miller patrolling the line behind us. She was the lookout for this shift, which meant she wasn't digging, but she was watching. I could feel her gaze on the back of my neck, heavier than the sun, hotter than the fire waiting 2 ridges over. I wanted to show her I was the sharp tool she'd calibrated the night before. I wanted to prove that her touch hadn't made me soft. It had made me lethal. I pushed harder. I overtook the rookie in front of me, taking his section of line, swinging until my shoulders screamed and my lungs burned. The sweat wasn't dripping anymore. It was running in rivulets, soaking through my yellow shirt, mapping my spine in dark, wet patches. Then the world tilted. It was subtle at first, a graying at the edges of my vision, a sudden lightness in my head that didn't match the heaviness in my boots. I swung the tool, but I missed the root. The head of the Pulaski glanced off a rock, sending a shockwave up my arms. I stumbled, my boot catching on a stump, and the horizon pitched sideways. I didn't hit the ground. A hand grabbed the yoke of my line gear, hauling me back with enough force to rattle my teeth. "Down," a voice commanded. I was shoved, firmly, not gently, onto a flat rock in the shade of a manzanita bush. I blinked, trying to clear the static from my eyes, and found Miller crouching in front of me. She wasn't wearing her sunglasses. Her eyes were stripped bare, scanning my face with a terrifying, clinical intensity. "You're red," she stated, her voice tight. "And you stopped sweating. That's a fail, Bishop." "I'm fine," I rasped, trying to stand. "Just tripped." "Sit," she snapped, a single syllable that froze my muscles. She didn't ask. She invaded. She stripped off her leather glove, dropping it in the dirt. Her bare hand, pale compared to the soot-stained skin of her arm, reached out and clamped onto my wrist. She wasn't holding my hand. She was taking my vitals. Her thumb pressed into my radial artery, digging deep to find the rhythm. I watched her count. Her lips moved silently, a micro-movement I was obsessed with. She was close enough that I could smell the peppermint of her lip balm over the stench of the fire. "Pulse is thready," she muttered. She shifted her grip, moving her hand from my wrist to my neck. Her fingers slid under my jaw, pressing into the sensitive hollow of my throat to find the carotid. The contact was a shock to my system. Her skin was cool, damp with her own sweat, against the fever heat of my neck. It was a medical check, a standard procedure for heat stress, but it felt like a claim. She held me there, her fingers distinct and heavy against my skin, anchoring me to the earth while my head tried to float away. I stopped breathing, terrified that if I inhaled, I'd lean into her hand. "Look at me," she ordered. I locked eyes with her. She leaned in, inspecting my pupils, looking for dilation. We were breathing the same recycled air in the small pocket of shade. The sounds of the crew digging, the thud, scrape, thud, faded into the background noise. It was just us. Her thumb stroked the line of my jaw, an unconscious movement that had nothing to do with safety protocols. "You're pushing too hard," she whispered. And for the first time, the command was gone. It was just an admission. "You're trying to impress me, and you're going to give yourself a stroke." "Is it working?" I whispered back, the words bypassing my filter. Her eyes dropped to my mouth, then snapped back up, darkening. Drink, she said, shoving her canteen into my chest.
You good, Bishop? The voice broke the bubble. Davis, a Sawyer from the second squad, was standing over us, holding out a cooling towel. He had that concerned puppy dog look that usually worked on the rookies. I got an extra towel if she needs it, Chief. Miller ignored him. Her hand stayed on my neck, eyes locked on mine, her fingers tightening slightly against my pulse point in a possessive, territorial flex. I have it handled, Davis, she said, her voice ice cold, cutting through the heat. Get back on the saw. You're losing spacing. Davis blinked, sensing the sudden spike in tension that had nothing to do with the fire. Right. On it. He retreated quickly. Miller watched him go, then turned her attention back to me. She took the canteen, unscrewed the cap, and held it to my lips like I was an invalid. Or a prize. Drink, she repeated, softer this time. Then you sit for 10. If you go down again, I'm carrying you out, and I will be extremely unpleasant about it. I drank. The water was warm and tasted like plastic, but I didn't care. I was too busy focusing on the way her hand lingered on my shoulder as she stood up. A heavy, grounding weight that told me, and everyone else watching, exactly who was in charge of my safety. And my pulse. The sun finally gave up around 2100, slipping behind the peaks and leaving us in a world painted in shades of charcoal and ember. Night shift on a fire is a different planet. The roar of the day quiets down to a crackle. The smoke settles into the valleys like heavy water, and the fire itself changes personality. It stops running and starts creeping, glowing like a bruised city skyline against the black slope. I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline from the heat exhaustion incident had curdled into a restless, itching anxiety under my skin. I needed air that didn't smell like 20 unwashed firefighters, so I grabbed my headlamp and hiked up to the lookout point, a granite outcropping that offered a panoramic view of the beast we were trying to tame. I expected solitude. Instead, I found Miller. She was sitting on the edge of the rock, legs dangling over the abyss, silhouetted against the dull orange glow of the burning canyon. But this wasn't the Miller I knew. Her helmet was off, resting on the rock beside her. Her radio chest harness was unbuckled, hanging loose. For the first time in 2 weeks, I saw her hair, messy, matted with sweat, and falling free around her face. The armor was gone. I stopped, my boots crunching on the loose gravel. She didn't flinch, didn't turn around. She just tilted her head slightly, acknowledging my presence without breaking her vigil. You're supposed to be recovering, Bishop, she said. Her voice lacked the command tone. It was just tired, rough from the smoke. I'm hydrated, I lied, stepping closer. Couldn't sleep. Too quiet. It's not quiet, she corrected softly. Listen. I stood beside her, listening to the darkness. Below us, the fire popped and hissed, trees torching out with a sound like a jet engine taking off, then fading back to a murmur. It's breathing, she whispered. I looked at her profile. The orange light softened the hard lines of her face, making her look younger, less like a statue and more like a woman haunting the ridge. Is that why you're up here, I asked? Watching it breathe? She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were dark pools reflecting the firelight. I'm watching for the shift. Fire is chaos, Bishop. It doesn't follow rules. It waits for you to blink, for you to get comfortable, and then it takes everything. You have to respect the chaos, but you can never trust it. Is that why you're so rigid? The question slipped out before I could filter it. Because you don't trust us? Or because you don't trust yourself? Miller stiffened, her eyes narrowing. It was a dangerous question, a direct strike at her command philosophy. But out here in the dark, with the world burning below us, the rank felt thinner. I don't do rigid for fun, she said, standing up. She turned fully toward me, the movement bringing her into my personal space. I do it because I know what happens when you lose the line. I know how fast a spark turns into a crown fire. I keep a tight grip because if I let go, if I let myself slip, even for a second, the intensity of it would consume everything. She wasn't talking about the fire anymore. We both knew it. The subtext hit me like a physical blow. She was talking about us, about the hand on the knee, the fingers on my pulse, the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. She was terrified that if she dropped the crew chief mask, the woman underneath would burn the whole forest down. Maybe, I stepped closer, some things are worth the burn. The air between us charged, thicker than the smoke. Miller looked at me, her gaze dropping to my lips, then snapping back to my eyes with a look of tortured hunger. She took a breath, a shaky inhale that rattled in her chest. "You're dangerous, Bishop," she murmured. She reached out, her hand hovering near my face, trembling slightly. She wanted to touch me. I could feel the intent radiating off her skin. "You're a variable I can't calculate." "Stop calculating," I whispered. "Just feel it." I leaned in. The distance between us closed to inches. I could feel the heat of her body, the warmth of her breath on my cheek. Her eyes fluttered shut, her defenses crumbling. She leaned forward, drawn by a gravity neither of us could fight. Our lips were a breath apart, the moment stretching, screaming to be broken. Crackle hiss. "Ops to Division Alpha. Copy?" The radio on her chest harness screamed, shattering the night. Miller flinched back as if she'd been burned, the spell breaking instantly. She grabbed the mic, her face hardening back into stone in a split second. "Division Alpha, go," she answered, her voice steady, professional, and completely empty of the heat that had just nearly consumed us. "Wind shift confirmed. We're moving the burn up. Get your crew to the drop point. Now." Miller looked at me, the mask firmly back in place. "Gear up, Bishop. It's time to light the world on fire." The Backfire is the Hail Mary of wildland firefighting. It's a paradox. We fight fire with fire, burning the fuel in front of the main front so that when the beast arrives, it has nothing left to eat. It requires surgical precision, absolute timing, and nerves of steel. If you light it too early, you lose the suction and the fire wanders. If you light it too late, the main front overruns you while you're standing there holding a can of gasoline. We lined up along the road, 20 yellow shirts glowing in the dark, watching Miller work. The rest of the crew were spectators for this part. The squad bosses held the line, but the firing operation belonged to the crew chief. Miller walked the edge of the asphalt, a drip torch in her hand. The canister was heavy, filled with a mix of diesel and gasoline that we call mix, designed to stick to the brush and burn hot. She looked like a deity of destruction. The orange glow of the main fire behind us backlit her silhouette, but the purple-blue flame dripping from the spout of her torch illuminated her face. She was unnervingly calm. She tilted the can, trailing a line of liquid fire into the dry grass at the road's edge. The fire took instantly, a whoosh of ignition that sucked the oxygen right out of the air. I watched her hands. The same hands that had calibrated my pulse hours ago were now expertly guiding a stream of flame, painting with fire. She moved with a rhythmic grace. Step, tilt, drip, step. The fire curled up, caught the draft of the main fire, and began to pull inward, just like it was supposed to. It was beautiful. It was controlled. It was Miller. But fire, as she had told me on the ridge, is chaos. The wind didn't just shift. It snapped. 1 second, the smoke was pulling nicely into the canyon. The next, a gust from the valley floor slammed into us, reversing the flow. The backfire we had just lit stood up, swirling angrily, and leaned back toward the road, toward the unburned fuel on the other side, toward us. "Watch your slop!" Miller yelled, her voice cutting through the roar. It happened in slow motion. An ember, bright and malicious, lofted over the road. It sailed past Miller's head, past the line of crew carriers, and landed 20 feet deep in the green, the unburned, bone-dry brush that was supposed to be our safety zone. "Spot!" someone screamed. "We got a spot!" The crew froze for a fraction of a second. A spot fire in the green is the worst-case scenario. If it established itself, we would be flanked, trapped between the main fire and our own backfire. Miller turned, dropping the torch, her eyes wide. "Get the engine! Get a hose lay in there!" But the engine was 50 yards down the road. The spot was already growing, expanding from the size of a dinner plate to the size of a car hood in seconds. The brush was exploding, the oils in the manzanita vaporizing instantly. I didn't think. I didn't wait for the hose. I didn't wait for orders. The variable in me took over. I broke rank. I sprinted off the road, crashing through the ditch and charging straight into the green, toward the growing flame. I could hear Miller screaming my name. "Bishop! No! Stand down!" But her voice sounded like it was underwater.
All I could hear was the roar of the fire taking hold. The heat hit me like a physical wall. I raised my tool, shielding my face with my arm, and threw myself at the leading edge of the spot. I swung the Pulaski with everything I had, digging a frantic scratch line around the perimeter. The smoke was blinding, choking me, stinging my eyes until they watered shut. I was coughing up soot, my lungs burning, but I kept swinging. Thud, scrape, throw dirt. I was inches from the flames. My Nomex shirt was hot enough to burn my skin. I smothered the base of the fire with dirt, cutting off its oxygen, stomping on the smaller licks of flame with my heavy boots. It was a brawl. It was me against the element she feared most. And then, it was out. The roar died down to a hiss. The spot was nothing but a smoking black circle in the brush. I stood there, chest heaving, gasping for air that wasn't poison. I was covered in fresh ash, my face blackened, my eyebrows singed. I had saved the line. I had saved the operation. I turned around, stumbling back toward the road, expecting relief, expecting a good job. I emerged from the brush and stopped dead. The entire crew was staring at me in silence. But I didn't look at them. I looked at Miller. She wasn't relieved. She was vibrating with a rage so pure it looked like white heat. Her face was pale beneath the soot, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. She marched toward me, ignoring the fire, ignoring the crew, her eyes locked on mine with a look that promised absolute devastation. I had crossed the professional boundary, and now there was no going back. Miller didn't stop until she was inside my personal space, invading the safety zone I had just tried to create. She bypassed the injury check, ignoring my singed eyebrows and soot-stained skin. Instead, she grabbed the shoulder straps of my line gear and shoved me backward. It wasn't enough to knock me down, but it was enough to rattle my teeth and snap my head back. "What the hell was that?" she screamed. Her voice wasn't the low, controlled frequency she used in the buggy. It was a raw, jagged tear in the night air that silenced the crackling of the brush. "You broke the chain of command. You left the safety zone. You ran into green fuel with an active spot fire." "I put it out," I yelled back, the adrenaline still coursing through me like battery acid. My hands were shaking so hard I had to clench them into fists to stop the tremors. The hose light wasn't there. It was going to cross the road. "I don't care if it burned the whole damn state down," Miller roared, stepping into me again, forcing me to take another step back toward the idling crew carriers. "You don't make that call. You are a Sawyer, Bishop, not a martyr. You don't run into fire unless I tell you to run into fire. Do you understand me? You are a liability." The word hit me harder than the heat had. Liability. After the nights spent maintaining tools, the hand on the knee, the fingers on my pulse, to be reduced back to a problem to be solved, a broken cog in her machine, it snapped something inside me. The crew was watching. 19 other hotshots, faces glowing orange in the firelight, stood frozen. The saws had idled down. The banter was dead. They were watching their crew chief dismantle me, piece by piece. Usually, this is where you take your licks. You look at your boots, you say, "Copy that," and you go dig latrines for a week. But I couldn't find the ground. The adrenaline from the near-death sprint mixed with the exhaustion and the terrifying intimacy of the last 24 hours, and it created a cocktail that dissolved my filter entirely. "I am not a liability," I screamed, my voice cracking. "I saved your operation. I saved your line. You risked your life." Miller was in my face now, nose to nose, her eyes wild and terrified and furious. "For what? For a patch of brush? For a tactic? It is a job, Bishop. It is just a job." "It's not just a job to you." I threw it back at her, stepping into her space, refusing to retreat. "You're the one who said the chaos takes everything. You're the one terrified of losing the line." "Because I am responsible for you," she yelled, her voice breaking on the last word. "Because if you burn, I have to explain to your family why I couldn't control my crew. I need you to be safe, not a hero." "I wasn't trying to be a hero." The truth clawed its way up my throat, burning hotter than the smoke. I didn't look at the crew. I didn't look at the fire. I looked at her. I looked at the fear behind the anger in her eyes. I didn't do it for the line, Miller. I didn't do it for the state. I did it for you.
The silence that followed was heavy, sucking the oxygen out of the road. But I couldn't stop. The dam had broken. I saw the look on your face, I confessed, my voice dropping to a desperate, ragged whisper that carried in the sudden quiet. I saw you panic, and I couldn't handle watching you lose control. I ran into that fire because the thought of you failing, the thought of you looking at me like I'm dead, was worse than the heat. I took a breath, a sobbing inhale that hurt my chest. I didn't do it for the crew. I did it because I'm in love with you, you rigid, terrifying idiot, and I couldn't watch you burn. The words hung in the air, radioactive. The idling engines of the buggies seemed to roar in the distance, but on the line, it was dead silent. 20 heads turned. I saw Davis's jaw drop. I saw the squad boss look away, suddenly finding his boots fascinating. I had just violated the cardinal rule of the crew. I had made it personal. I had taken the sacred bond of the line and twisted it into something intimate and messy and public. Miller stared at me. Her mouth was slightly open, her chest heaving with exertion. The anger drained out of her face, replaced by a shock so profound it looked like physical pain. She looked at the crew, seeing them for the first time in minutes. She saw them watching us. She saw the realization dawning on 20 dirty, exhausted faces. She looked back at me. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, swirling with the reflection of the flames and 1,000 calculations running at light speed. She didn't fire me or yell. She reached out, grabbed the front of my shirt in a fist of iron, and yanked me sideways. "Truck," she hissed. "Now." It wasn't a request. She didn't wait for me to walk. She dragged me, marching me away from the staring crew, away from the fire line, and toward the dark, private cab of the command pickup parked 50 yards up the road. The silence of the crew burned my back as we walked away, hotter than the fire I had just put out. The walk to the pickup wasn't a walk. It was a forced march. Miller's grip on my shirt didn't loosen until we reached the heavy-duty Ford parked in the shadows. She wrenched the passenger door open and threw me inside. I scrambled onto the vinyl seat, the smell of stale coffee instantly replacing the smoke. Before I could get my bearings, she slammed the door, a gunshot sound in the valley, and stormed around the front. I watched her through the windshield. She gripped the bull bar for a second, head hung low, hyperventilating. Then she ripped the driver's door open and vaulted in, slamming us into a suffocating privacy. The cab was dark, lit only by the green radio glow. The silence was heavier than the smoke. "Explain," she said. Her voice was a terrifyingly calm vibration. She stared at the dark road, knuckles white on the wheel. My voice failed. "I told you. I couldn't watch it hit the green." "Not the fire, Bishop!" She turned on me, the movement violent. "The rest! You stood in front of my command and turned a tactical briefing into a diary entry. You stripped me naked out there." "It just came out," I whispered. "The adrenaline." "Adrenaline isn't an excuse for insubordination," she snapped. "Or for that." "For loving you?" I asked. The words felt reckless. Is that the insubordination part, or just inconvenient? Miller let out a sound like a growl. She unbuckled her seatbelt and turned fully toward me. The center console was the only thing keeping her from strangling me. "Inconvenient?" she repeated, voice rising. "Bishop, I have spent 2 weeks trying to keep you alive. I spent every hour calibrating the distance between us. I put my hand on your knee to stop myself from reaching higher. I check your pulse because it's the only excuse I have to touch your skin." My breath hitched. You think you're the only one suffering?" She leaned across the console, invading my space. "You think I don't know? I built that line in the dirt to protect you from me." "Then why are you yelling?" I breathed, heart hammering. "Because you said it out loud," she hissed. "Now it's real. Now I can't pretend it's the job. You crossed the line and dragged me with you." "So what are you going to do?" I challenged, gazing at her mouth. "Fire me?" "I should," she whispered, eyes tracking my movement. The anger was morphing into hunger. "I should have you gone by morning." "Do it," I dared. "I can't," she admitted, the words ragged. "I can't let you go." The last thread of control snapped. Miller lunged across the console. Her hand tangled into the hair at my neck,
pulling me forward as I surged to meet her. Our mouths collided. It wasn't soft. It was a crash. Teeth and ash and the starving friction of two people who had been denying this for hundreds of miles.
She tasted like smoke and peppermint. Her other hand bunched my yellow shirt in her fist, anchoring me. I made a noise in my throat, a whimper I would have been embarrassed by if I wasn't trying to climb over the gear shift. The kiss deepened, rougher, fueled by the near-death experience. I felt her tongue against mine, claiming. My hands found her face, smearing soot on her cheeks. She pressed me back against the door, straining against the console to eliminate the distance. The radio crackled, but neither of us heard it. The only sound was our harsh breathing. She bit my lower lip, a sharp, possessive graze. I gasped, opening for her, and she groaned low in her throat. It was messy and desperate and perfect. When she finally pulled back, we were gasping. Her forehead rested against mine, eyes squeezed shut. Her hand still held my hair, holding me like I was the only solid thing in a world on fire. "You are a disaster," she whispered, voice wrecked.
"I know," I panted, lips buzzing. "And now," she opened her eyes, the dark intensity burning. "You're my disaster." The professional line hadn't just been crossed. We had burned it. There was no going back to the old protocols. We were deep in the fire now. The sun over the ridge wasn't the gentle morning glow of a romance novel. It was a blinding, accusatory glare cutting through the windshield of the Ford. I woke up with a crick in my neck that felt like a knife, my head resting against the cold glass of the passenger window. The cab was freezing, the heater having died hours ago, but there was a heavy, radiating warmth anchoring my left side. I froze, the memories of the night before crashing into me like a falling tree. The fire, the scream, the truck. I looked down. Miller's hand was resting on my thigh. It wasn't a casual drape. Her fingers were curled into the fabric of my yellow Nomex, a subconscious grip she hadn't released, even in sleep. For a second, the old panic flared, the morning after spiral. I waited for her to wake up and realized she had compromised her command. I waited for the Ice Queen to return, to pull her hand away and tell me it was a mistake born of adrenaline and exhaustion. "Stop thinking so loud," a voice rasped. I jumped. Miller was looking at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed, but clear. She wasn't pulling away. If anything, her grip on my leg tightened, grounding me before I could float away into anxiety. "I'm not thinking," I lied, my voice a wreck. "I'm assessing logistics." "The logistics are simple," she said, sitting up and finally releasing my leg to rub her face. The loss of contact made me shiver. She looked at me, deadpan. "We have a briefing at 0600. You need coffee. I need to yell at Davis about the sawgas. And we are not pretending this didn't happen." "We aren't?" "I don't do pretending, Bishop. It's inefficient." She opened the driver's door, letting in the frigid mountain air. "Let's go. Time to face the music." Walking back to the crew was worse than walking into the fire. The camp was awake, a circle of grimy, soot-stained figures huddled around the jet boil stoves, nursing instant coffee. As we approached, the low murmur of conversation died instantly. 19 pairs of eyes snapped to us. They looked from Miller to me, then back to Miller. The math wasn't hard to do. We had disappeared into a truck for 8 hours after a public declaration of love. I wanted to shrink. I wanted to find a shovel and dig a hole straight to the core of the earth. Miller didn't break stride. She walked straight into the center of the silent circle, her boots crunching loudly on the gravel. Far from embarrassed, she looked like she owned the mountain, the fire, and everyone standing on it. "Eyes on me," she barked, her voice raspy but commanding. The crew straightened up, the reflex to obey overriding the desire to gossip. "The burn operation was a mess. We got lucky. Today we mop up. I want cold trailing on the entire perimeter. If I find one hot ember in the green, you're hiking out." She paused, letting the orders sink in. Then, with the entire crew watching, she reached for the steaming metal cup sitting on the tailgate of the buggy, her personal coffee. She took a sip, her eyes scanning the group, daring anyone to speak. Then, deliberately, she turned and handed the cup to me. It was a small gesture. To a civilian, it meant nothing. To the crew, it was a marriage proposal. It was a public claim. "Drink,"
she ordered softly, for my ears only. You look like hell. I took the cup, my fingers brushing hers. The crew watched the handoff. Davis looked like his brain was short-circuiting. But Miller just turned back to them, her face set in stone. What are you looking at? She challenged. Get your gear. We're burning daylight. The crew scrambled. The gossip would come later, in whispers, but the verdict was in. The variable had been integrated into the equation. The ride home was just as loud, just as cramped, and just as smelly as the ride in. But the vibration was different. Miller still wore her sunglasses, and she still sat with her arms crossed, the picture of absolute control. But she wasn't listening to the silence anymore. She was sharing her space. My head was resting on her shoulder, right against the hard line of her deltoid, and nobody said a word. The friction between us hadn't been hate. It was just the sparks flying from two things trying desperately to connect. If you want to feel the heat of the next fire season, subscribe.